speak to any founder, I think anyone who's been on the show, like building a business is hard and it's lonely and it's a grind, and everyone has this default to be like, I've got an idea, I'm going to hold it close to my chest because I don't want to share my ideas. Whereas actually the opposite is true. The more people you tell, the more insights you get and feedback you get, and that crafts your thinking and how you're doing that. And that was a large part of what the birthplace of Growth Hub was just to get like-minded people into a room.
Welcome, builders, to How Would You Build It? The podcast that dives deep into the dynamic world of startups and product creation right here in South Africa and Africa. This show is more than just interviews. Every week, we sit down with the brilliant minds to provide a masterclass for building digital products amidst the challenges and opportunities unique to our continent. From seasoned founders to dynamic product managers, we uncover the unique stories and strategies behind some of the most innovative digital products being built. So for all the aspiring founders and product builders out there, you'll discover that each episode is a wealth of practical wisdom and local and actionable insights. Make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to our podcasts and connect with us on social media for even more content. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Welcome everybody to another episode of How Would You Build It? It's episode 49, reaching that 50 mark, and I'm really excited. As you can see, it's a full house today. But as always, my co-host René, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Bobby. Lekker. Excited to chat about solar and everything around it today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's very interesting as we sit here in stage, I don't know, 6, 5, or 4. I'm not quite sure of load shedding again in South Africa. And we're going to be talking EVs and solar power and renewable energy. And I'm really excited. So we have a return guest, Michael. You're back with us. How are you doing? Welcome back.
Hi, great to be back. Thanks, Bobby.
Yeah, so
Michael's officially the first person that's come back for the second time. So
yeah, must like what we do.
That's an achievement.
Well done, Michael. Great. You obviously did something right.
I'm looking for a hosting position if you have one available.
Ooh,
yes, it's getting a bit crowded here, but if I go on holiday, I'll let you know.
I like that. Yeah. And then we have our new guest. It's Ross, and he's from Versify. Ross, welcome and thank you for joining.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's just dive straight in. I mean, we're going to be talking renewable energy, and it's so interesting to talk. I think I saw, I don't know where it was now, obviously with online, there's so much content being thrown our direction, but someone was saying in an interview just how at the forefront South Africa is in its transition to renewable. Now, obviously we know we don't really have a choice in the matter because of load shedding once again, but at the end of the day, the stats are saying 349% increase in renewable, capacity being increased on the grid in just the last year. I mean, what an incredible feat that we're doing. Ross, do you just want to add to that? I mean, just because, as I understand, you guys are actually installing the solars on people's houses, right?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, we set on this journey, load shedding was a thing, but it was never anywhere near to what it is kind of today. We have stage 6 for the first time this year over this weekend as well. And obviously not an ideal scenario for the country, but what it has done, and I think in years to come, we'll look back on this time kind of fondly because it has acted as a massive catalyst in terms of adoption of this technology, and something that we obviously massively supportive of, for a sustainable green future.
Yeah. It's so amazing. I mean, look, winter's coming, and this is what freaks me out about, having a lack of energy in the middle of summer, but nonetheless, here we are. But Michael, we're going to be talking about partnerships later, but we're witnessing a transition, the power that's coming onto the grid. I mean, as someone that's really in the thick of it, like, what are the biggest lessons that you're learning, like partnering with the likes of Ross, and just what kind of trends are you mostly witnessing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be in the energy space. I think specifically in South Africa, with all the challenges we have. I think, one of the biggest trends is just a massive uptake in solar for even big commercial industries and businesses. I think they've realized that A, it's load shedding proof in most cases. B, they can optimize costs, they can drive costs down, which is fantastic. And C, they can do something that's sustainable and good for the environment, that's good for their customers and good for their shareholders. On our side specifically, we've realized that one of the biggest challenges that's being faced by companies is also just thinking about how much supply is available, right? So getting even more supply at your locations is tough if you don't go solar. So they're realizing that just getting more grid connections is a very timely process. So why not shift to solar? So I think that the appetite for solar has just been massive across our experience.
Mm.
And I think, Michael, what's interesting is like I heard people speak about, just the cost of running generators, right? So, and the fact that they are prepared, someone told me the other day, they're prepared to pay up to 40 Rand a kilowatt hour just for reliable electricity, right? But, and that's the level it gets to if you have to buy a 2 million Rand generator, you have to keep it running, you have to fill it with diesel all the time. I mean, all of that just adds to the cost of electricity. So, sometimes we think about solar and we think if you look at the capital outlay of it and you think how much money you'll save from it, a lot of people aren't comparing it to what Eskom is currently charging for electricity. They're comparing it to alternatives. And if you do that, you obviously open a massive market. And Ross, are you seeing a lot of people businesses coming to you and saying, you know what, we can't afford paying 2 million Rand for a generator, but we need power non-stop. Like, let's just go to solar route.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, our whole business model, long-term business model, is based on the premise of parity being achieved. So a blend of solar and grid will be cheaper than only grid. And we're not far away from that. We 1 or 2 increases away from our current kind of pricing. However, you alluded to the fact that a lot of businesses have generators, and with generators come running costs outside of diesel, their servicing costs. And parity is actually achievable on day one. So we're seeing a massive uptick in demand for solar alongside diesel and grid, or generators and grid, because you can achieve a positive ROI immediately and get cash flow positive immediately, which is awesome to see. Again, terrible circumstances, but this is the world we live in, and we are kind of glad that we are able to provide a solution to these companies.
And I think what's interesting is if I don't know when the results came out, Rene, maybe you can help because I know you're also on the top of these things, but like Pick n Pay and ShopRite, when they announced their results, I think last quarter, whenever it was, they attributed the fact that load shedding, the cost of load shedding and running these generators ate into their margins, and it's killing their business. And Ross, I can imagine that they are slowly, so yes, the households need it obviously in winter and whatnot, but I'm sure these big businesses are coming, knocking and saying, please, can you come help us? Because those margins, we're just eating into them, right?
100%. It's across the board. So it's obviously into their OpEx and running costs that it affects their bottom lines and their margins, but it's also their customer base, right? The share of wallet affects everybody. People are losing their jobs. The economy is coming to kind of a grinding halt. So it's got this downstream effects throughout that kind of ripples through the economy. So that's why we're trying to play on both sides. We're trying to be in the home and help from that kind of avenue, but also at these businesses levels. Like solar unlocks so much value for the whole economy as and value chain as a whole, which is great to see.
Just to add to that, I think I read an interesting stat about the retail space, for example, when there is load shedding, the reduction in footfall and foot traffic at those locations. So something as simple as just having lighting available in the shop makes people feel comfortable to go in there. So yeah, the ripple effects are multiple.
And I'm sure you'll find that across the board, even in like streets and stuff. Imagine like, walking in a neighborhood and all the lights are on. Safety, big thing. Sorry, Ross.
I remember, sorry, it's just, it jogged my memory. I had in 2008, when load shedding first hit, I had a mate come through from the US, 2 mates of mine, never been to South Africa before. And literally the day they arrived, load shedding hit for the first time. And we went to Sandton City, which is like the richest mile in Africa, and it was like a side street sale with no lights on. They're like, is this your shopping mall? I was like, it's not really how it normally is, but yes, this is the reality now, it seems. And yeah, whatever it is, 14 years later, we still here even more. Yeah, exactly.
So Ross, you mentioned earlier, like, it's not great circumstances, but I think there's obviously a part of this which is really positive. Like I've installed solar myself, and just the ease of using electricity now without having to worry too much about, how much you're spending. I mean, during the day, if I run an aircon, it's basically free to run. And Michael, I want to bring it back over to you. Like, I mean, if I have an electric car, you guys are in the the electric vehicle space. If I have an electric vehicle space, I can basically drive for free, right?
That's exactly it. And I think that's where our collaboration with Versify kind of started. It was really trying to solve the issue of supply, so supply availability for the electric fleet. So thinking of electric fleet like in terms of logistics, delivery of technical services. So they'll drive during the day mainly and then charge at night, which means that they do need some form of battery backup system. And also municipal tariff rates are becoming increasingly higher. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting when you think about your mobility as you now have this opportunity to really generate your own petrol out of the sun, and that's actually just like such a wonderful way of thinking about it, right? Like just thinking like, wow, I'm literally just harnessing petrol from the air.
And you're
But it's
beating
good for the
everybody
environment.
else, right? Because everybody else
And
has
you're
to put in petrol, and you can just like, I'm driving for free.
Exactly that. And if you work out, the costs of the ownership of the vehicle, of the reduction in cost for that energy cost, factoring in things like solar and battery, you're actually winning as well from a cost perspective, and it's a better experience. So I think it's such an interesting idea to think, wow, if we can combine both the energy generation with the advanced energy management and the distribution on the vehicle level, and then do some optimization on that becomes that's kind of a cool future, right? In which you can think about logistics and things being managed like that. I think, yeah, definitely as a consumer for me, having solar available, having that energy available to charge my vehicle and drive around is a fantastic idea. So yeah.
But Michael, like word on the street, and Ross, you can jump in. I mean, if you speak to people, like no one's thinking about buying an EV, right? So is it simply just the mindset that we're so consumed by the lack of electricity that we don't even consider EV? Is there a lack of regulation that's helping this move? Are we not bringing in, enough high quality vehicles or even at affordable levels? I know there's some premium vehicles, but what's causing this slowish uptake in adoption compared to, the rest of the world? I mean, everywhere it seems to be taking off, but yeah, it seems to be taking longer, and at some point it's going to happen. It's just taking longer. Like in your experience, like what is causing that slowish or sluggish adoption?
You're definitely talking to different people than I am. But yeah, I think in general, tech adoption in South Africa takes longer, right? Like I think in most cases, we're usually a couple of years behind when it comes to any new tech or innovation being dispersed. I mean, even things like online services, etc. We tend to have a bit of a lag of a couple of years. I think that's one part of it. I think you're absolutely right, René. I think the availability of vehicle models is prohibitive at the moment for fleets. We've seen that for fleets, they've had about a twofold increase in the availability of models, but going from 11 models to 24 models, right? Some people are very brand specific. If they like Isuzu for their fleet, they want to buy Isuzu. So if Isuzu doesn't have an EV available, they're not going to necessarily do that. I think another big part of it really is education, right? Really helping them understand what does that cost model look like? Because they don't necessarily have those facts and figures available just for running their operational model, because they've been doing it for so long for petrol and for diesel that they don't know how to do that necessarily. So we find that in a lot of cases with fleet customers specifically, because the vehicles are also much cheaper, right? So they're not in that luxury segment. If you run through the cost modeling and you educate and you show even just the availability of the current models, they're very keen to explore it at least, or to start piloting it. I think it's going to take a couple of years. I think it'll probably take another 2 to 3 years for us to get like really good traction. But I think that's kind of the major trends prohibiting uptake at the moment.
Just to add to that, I think if you look at kind of any S-curve of adoption where disruption happens, where there's mass adoption, it's always at when it's economically beneficial to the end user effectively. So we can have this green agenda, which we do, but that's almost a byproduct of what we do. I believe that, and I think EVs will trail just behind solar, not far behind, but solar is going to get mass adopted when it's cheaper than the alternative, which is the grid, which, as I alluded to earlier, is not far away. And as soon as solar is adopted, then the ability to charge for free and effectively bring down your total cost of ownership at a vehicle level, it's going to be mass adopted as well. I think obviously the resistance or the lack of adoption is a few-fold in South Africa. I think regulations play a massive part in that, in terms of the tariffs that are levied on EVs as a whole. But I do think, to Michael's point, education is a massive element, because when you're just comparing cost of kilowatt hour to cost of a liter of petrol, that's only one kind of slice of the equation. It's all the moving parts, the lubricants, the servicing, all of these things that come into play. And I don't know if this is going to end up transpiring, but my kind of prediction is you're going to be driving an EV, charging it at your place of work for free, and then going home and actually plugging your EV into your home and powering your home off that same battery, and effectively just bringing your whole kind of lifestyle getting powered by this free.
I mean, what kind of capacity are we talking about on that?
Yeah, generally when you have a consumer vehicle, on average is anything from like 40 to 60 kilowatt hours. So that's quite substantial.
That's more than what you need overnight.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're thinking of your daily range, and I mean, this is the same for fleets, is that you're typically not doing more than 100 kilometers a day. Like if you do that, like unless you do like long distance travel or something like that. So you'll typically be depleting, let's say 25 to 50% max of that battery in any case. So that becomes quite an interesting modeling exercise to see how do you optimize for that, right? How do you ensure you charge during the day, discharge at night? You know, that's really a fun kind of engineering exercise.
And Ross, I love what you said. I mean, all these things always come down to the free market, right? And I love free market principles. You know, the fact of the matter is, as soon as this becomes economically more attractive, then we'll see it. So I think regulation obviously has a big role to play here. I know that the import duties on the EVs are quite high to protect our local manufacturers, but I believe government is busy looking at changing that and encouraging development of EVs locally. Obviously, the European Union is banning combustion engines in 2030, I believe, at which point we won't be able to export to the EU anyway, so we might as well start making EVs. We're going to lose the massive market if we're not ready.
100%. And it's quite interesting. When I met Michael for the first time, the education that he kind of gave me on the space and the affordability at the fleet level was so enlightening, really, because everyone thinks of EVs from a consumer perspective, and it's like, okay, what happens if I need to drive to Bloem tomorrow for work? Like, obviously there's you know, some restrictions there, but the take-a-lot driver that's driving 3Ks a trip and is doing actually only 120 Ks a day, he's just doing a hell of a lot of them, it actually works beautifully. And now all of a sudden they're getting exposed to the power of EV, excuse the pun, you know, and it starts to ingrain that, oh shit, this actually works. And I think adoption then happens in different kind of beachhead approaches, in a sense.
Yeah, and I mean, it's actually beautiful because these companies know exactly how far those drivers drive every day. I mean, they've got data for years, and they can even optimize around that and all the, you know, different charging at different places, and it becomes almost an entire new industry around planning all of this. But I mean, like you rightly point out, it's probably more attractive to companies. I can imagine all these last mile guys as well. I mean, last mile is picking up. Amazon is launching their marketplace because they know, you know, e-commerce is really going to take off in the next 12 months in South Africa. I think the timing is perfect. I think 60/60 actually drove us over the edge for people to really start adopting e-commerce, and now it's going mainstream. So yeah, so last mile delivery guys, I think it's perfect for them, really.
Yeah, and sorry, just to jump in there as well, like that's the beauty of the market we play in. So South Africa and Africa as a whole, obviously, you know, we have the ability to leapfrog technologies that didn't exist in between. But what we're seeing, and I'm sure Michael's going to be seeing it in his space, is we're almost becoming the forefront of a lot of these technologies that we apply to the asset class. So we have variables that the rest of the world don't have, like grid outages every day for, you know, up to 11, 12 hours a day, different weather conditions. There's a lot of technology that we are building internally using South African, you know, developers and using South Africa as the use case. Now the rest of the world is kind of perking up their ears to be like, oh, that's interesting. And that's exactly what Simi are doing effectively in the EV space. So yes, these guys sit on all this data, but they don't know how to digest it necessarily. And the fact that Simi have this ability to see where every driver is going, how long, plan the efficiencies and optimization around it, like there's diminishing returns to what you can do in fleets from an ICE kind of perspective, and where like the EVs coming in, and Michael can kind of jump in here, just opens it up to these efficiencies that at first glance you don't actually even know are there, and that's super exciting, I think, for these big scale businesses.
Yeah, definitely. I think it becomes also really interesting as we start pulling in data from the energy production as well. So from the inverter sets, from the solar sets, and seeing how that can be tailored and tweaked to also, add even more efficiency. So I think it becomes quite I always say a cool engineering problem because it's just fun to do some math, but it also just becomes a really useful place where we can deliver more value for businesses, right? So seeing all of these data points and helping them to understand that, because that's really the future of where I see energy is going. And energy being such a fundamental thing, not only to mobility, but also to just usage for businesses in general.
I just want to go back to Renier made a comment earlier, Michael, and you were like, I don't know who you're talking to, because there was a guy on Twitter or X that tweeted saying that sales of passenger electric vehicles in South Africa rose by 65% in 2023. I mean, we're obviously going from a small base, but I mean, that's significant. That the graph is going up. There's a small hockey stick that's happening. So it is moving it's happening.
And I think this is the most important thing that I've realized in the past kind of year or two, is that brand consciousness for people is really, really powerful. I didn't know it, but then I started looking a bit at the brands that I buy and I support, and I went, okay, no, I'm just the same as everybody else. If you go and look at the top sellers from, I think, the past 12 months, the Volvo XC40 or the EX30 was one of the top sellers, right? Because that vehicle came in at a price point which was, let's say, sub 800K, which was already a significant improvement from the 1.4, 1.5 million rand other luxury vehicles. It came at a performance range of, I think, about 300 or 350 kilometers, which seems to be, people find that acceptable. Like they feel that even though they don't use it, that comfort level is important. And you're seeing more pervasive deployment of public chargers. I mean, the public networks have almost doubled, I think, in the past kind of 12 months. So people are starting to see more chargers, etc. So I do think it's almost similar to Ross, where you probably saw solar in like the early 2010s, right? When that price point just started becoming very feasible for home users to look at that like per kilowatt hour pricing over time. I think with EVs, that price parity will probably be reached in the next 24 months, especially as more brands get released. So yeah, definitely a massive appetite, but not enough supply on the vehicle side.
Yeah, and I think also, like, again, plays into our laps quite nicely, that natural lag between us and the rest of the world, because naturally with the new technology, there's always, a bit of hesitation as to whether it's going to work and whatnot. But, there's a lot of people driving Teslas. There's a lot of people driving, i3s around in Europe and whatnot. And that's the proof point, I suppose, to kind of just give us that peace of mind. So I expect that number to drive upwards, exponentially over the coming years, to be honest.
And it's probably, I mean, if we think about the brands, I mean, I know Elon said the other day they're not coming to South Africa, but I mean, if Tesla were to launch here, I mean, that would give it all just a massive boost, right? And whether or not you believe it's a good EV is actually irrelevant. There's enough Elon Musk fanboys locally that will make you see more Teslas on the road and then think that EVs actually work in South Africa, and then perhaps consider one. So absolutely agree. And yeah, Michael, I mean, we're all brand loyal. Like, remember growing up, it's a Volkswagen or it's a Toyota. Those are the two options. And, you banked at ABSA. And, there's a few other things that go with that. Luckily,
you got 2 out of 3 on me there. 2 out of 3.
Another huge thing, again, that like is playing into our laps so nicely, is there's the adoption of household solar. You alluded to it earlier, is massive, right? So big kind of drive for our Zimmy partnership with Versify is to make home charging a reality for a lot of people, which nullifies that argument about range, because if everywhere you're going you have the ability to charge, even if it's passively and slowly overnight, doesn't really matter. That's already an up on ICE vehicles. Nobody's got jerry cans, or very few people have jerry cans lying in their house that fill up their their Land Cruisers. Yeah, exactly. I don't even think you're allowed to be honest. So yeah.
But it's also, I mean, I find the fact that it can be a backup battery, I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, if you are not into the numbers, like a 40 kilowatt hour battery is probably can run your household for a day. Obviously depending on how many air cons you have, but generally a medium to large size household can easily run off that even with no solar. So that's a big backup storage unit for when it's maybe cloudy for 5 days.
100%. And the fact that you know that, I think comes down to the fact that you've got solar. Like I think 5 years ago, no one knew what a kilowatt hour.
No, I had no idea. Now I'm checking Solarman Smart
right?
twice a day. I'm like, what are we making today?
Exactly. It's like, so we've launched our own app, Versify Home, and we've just got this luxury of I mean, speak to any app developer. The biggest challenge is to get adoption and to get people to download their app. That's inherent in our product that we sell, and we've got these eyeballs glued. But I think where I'm heading with this is we're seeing a lot of behavior changes through to awareness. So that's one of the beauties that solar has provided people, is they actually know, what a kilowatt hour is, and they're checking that app. You're not alone in the fact that people are checking that app like twice, 3, 4, 5 times a day. Because you'll see a spike at like 2 in the morning and be like, what's that? Or you're going around and you're like, the energy narcs in your house, like turning off lights and whatnot. So it just brings this awareness around, and it's the same kind of argument or logic that was applied to Day Zero in Cape Town in terms of water usage. That was demand side management effectively. And that's what's going to happen in mass, I think, when people adopt this technology and they're aware of what's happening. So it's hugely encouraging to see.
So what I'm interested to understand is the competition out there, Ross, because if the market is still so early, I mean, I've definitely seen a lot of, buckies driving around in my area with, solar installation. So can you just give us just the landscape, the competitive landscape, also considering that, you've got China that are able to produce these, these pieces of, the hardware at a much cheaper rate than what they were a couple of years ago. So what is the effect of them on the market, as well as the competition that you're kind of competing against?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's been part of our mantra from day one. We have this kind of saying in the office: we all for collaboration over competition. That's our kind of business model, and also talks to, I suppose, to the Zimmy partnership. But we obviously do compete with the man in the van solar installers, but we are actually almost trying to partner with them rather, and let them be our installers or part of our network of installers. Because where we play really is, our business model is a long-term solar subscription type model or rent-to-own model. We offer both. But the point being, our narrative to the customers, we're here for the journey with you. The risk of going with, XYZ Electrical is, are they going to be around in 2, 3, 4, 5 years with a system that's designed to last, 10, 15, 20 years? So long story short, there is a lot of competition. I think every man and his dog got into the space. There's been a bit of a plateau in demand, from about August last year, and already people have kind of fallen off. I think that's a natural progression of things. I think there's going to be a lot of just ease into the market, and without disrespect, the rats and mice are going to kind of fall away. And there's going to be this more regulated, more experienced professional market that emerges, which I think we are all pro. The fact that China are producing these things at rock bottom prices, I mean, notwithstanding the fact that we obviously want to support local and be proudly South African, we do embrace the mass production of these things, because it just drives the cost further down, and therefore, that parity becomes that much closer, and we try to pass on as much of that value to, or all of that value to, our customer base as possible. The more people who use this technology, the better. But regulation has a massive role to play, because the last thing we need is people using speaker wire, wiring into DBs, and that becomes a health risk and gives everyone a kind of a bad name. So we are kind of putting mini power plants on everybody's house, and potentially many power station, or not power stations, petrol stations rather, in people's garages. There's got to be some elements of regulation that comes into play, and we kind of pro that because it's imperative, I think.
Well, this kind of segues into where I want to go. I mean, Renier shared an article with me leading up to this
interview, and it was around the skills development that's going to be needed in South Africa. There was an article that went into detail about, you know, the different areas that's going to be needed, and it all hangs off maintenance. So I would like to understand from you guys, so A, what does the maintenance look like for all the hardware that you're providing? If they're coming from China, is it easy? Like, what do you guys provide as a service for these kind of things? And just in general, what do you see for, you know, like what is missing in the industry? Like, you know, if there's somebody that wants to get in, maybe not sell the solar or the chargers, you know, what other sort of, what's the word, complementary services is needed and lacking in the industry? I don't know. A question for both. So, Michael, you can go first.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you start looking at, you know, this turnkey solution of having the charger, you know, the generator, the supply, the battery, etc. together. Your maintenance really becomes this type of optimization that you could be doing over time. So we can, for example, remotely diagnose errors, right? We don't have to come on site and help you out immediately. We can predict problems beforehand, right? We can do some forecasting and prediction on that. So it doesn't become as much physical maintenance because, again, the systems are designed to be low maintenance. So I think that becomes quite an interesting, also to go into your second part of the question, an interesting adjacency. So how can you, for example, build systems where you start doing a lot of these operations, and let's call them energy operations, right? Automatically, right? How do you take all of that away from the end user who isn't necessarily a technical expert, to actually be able to deploy solar and charging and electric fleets, you know, comfortably, right? So that becomes quite an interesting one. And then I think in the upstream side, I mean, again, batteries. I mean, batteries for both storage and for EVs is such a big cost point at the moment. There's a lot of work being done globally, I think, on the R&D for batteries. But I think even locally, doing things like battery assemblies, etc., is such a massive gap. Like, I don't know, Ross, if you've seen that from your supply side as well.
Yeah, hugely. I think supporting these systems downstream is imperative, right? I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the recycling of batteries, the second life batteries, as an example, because there's also this misconception that, you know, post 10 years, throw the thing away. That's not the case at all. It's just kind of diminished by, you know, 20-odd%. These things are still very much usable. There's a beautiful secondary market that opens up, you know, a wider target market in terms of affordability and getting these second life batteries into the market on the one hand. So 100%, I think a lot of those peripherals are around just the supporting and reusing, again, through the sustainable lens, you know, these materials that are built to last. And naturally, there's going to be Moore's law and there's going to be adoption, and the guys we're selling to today may not want their systems for 20 years because the new shiny one comes out in 4 or 5 years time, you know, so it opens it up the secondary market for us. And just on the labor point and the kind of the jobs market, one of the beauties of solar, which actually isn't often talked about, funnily enough, is the fact that you need to, like, the rest of the world is and a lot of industries are turning to remote work and to outsourcing to other countries and Asia and whatnot, especially in the dev space, tech space, you know, call centers, all of those things, everything kind of gets shipped off in that direction. However, you can't get someone, you know, in China to install a panel on your roof. You know, there needs to be proximity to your target market. So we're seeing a lot of opportunities in skills development, in training, in whatnot for this new technology that is getting rapidly adopted, which is awesome to see. So I think there's a lot of opportunities from a training perspective, universities, courses, et cetera, to start kind of incorporating this tech. And then on the peripherals, there's so much. We've just brought an embedded insurance product to market. It's the first of its kind, you know, that's catering for insurance of solar included in a subscription, as an example. There's a lot in the technology space around looking at load shedding schedules, looking at weather, predicting pattern recognition, so that you're not wasting by charging your battery up to 100% every time there's load shedding. Maybe you only need to go to 60% or whatever the case is. The meter level, you know, the smart meter of today is still a thing that you need to go and buy a voucher from Pick and Pay and physically plug it in. I mean, I don't know what's smart about that, you know. So like there's all of these things that are emerging that if we want to sell back into the grid, you have the ability to install a true smart meter that utilities can use to balance loads effectively. So I just think we're in such early stages, and it's super exciting around the ancillaries and peripherals of the industry as a whole. Massive opportunities are going to emerge out this space.
And I mean, there's two massive tailwinds in South Africa, one being load shedding, and the other, the fact that the whole world wants to go global. And I think we even spoke about it, Michael, in the last time we spoke, but 2035, they want to take away, diesel and petrol fueled cars. So, I mean, the trend is in both directions. So it's a great industry to be in. And I think maybe that hockey stick is going to be looking good for a good couple of years still. I mean, load shedding ain't going away.
And it's, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I spoke about the leapfrog kind of analogy earlier, but you look at Octopus Energy as an example in the UK. They are trying to encourage people and educate people to put not to put solar, sorry, to put batteries in their properties, because that helps so much. Whereas in South Africa, it's inherent. Like, you don't get solar without battery. You know what I mean? So you don't even need to educate and encourage. It's just like, it's the default, which is quite cool to see.
So I'm going to shift the conversation over a little bit, because I think it's quite interesting that, like we spoke about competition, like normally the mindset is like, stay away from a competitor, you don't want to share secrets and stuff like that. But generally kind of feel that founders, I don't know if it's around the globe, but I definitely see it in South Africa, founders tend to actually gravitate towards each other, especially from the same industry. And we know that South Africa's got a very small piece of the pie. It's a very small market. So, it's going to be very easy for you to bump into a competitor. And Ross, I did a little bit of digging, and I saw that you actually were a founder of a thing called Growth Hub. And I actually recall seeing Growth Hub not that long ago. So I just want to understand, get your insights into partnerships, the value that you find in it, and how you and Michael kind of came together and developed this, knowing that there's a big opportunity for both parties here.
Yeah, I mean, speak to any founder, I think, anyone who's been on the show, like, building a business is hard, and it's lonely, and it's a grind, and everyone has this default to be like, I've got an idea, I'm going to hold it close to my chest because I don't want to share my ideas. Whereas actually the opposite is true. The more people you tell, the more insights you get and feedback you get, and that kind of crafts your thinking and how you're doing that. And that was a large part of what the birthplace of Growth Hub was just to get like-minded people into a room. This is pre-COVID, so in-person events was a lot more kind of prevalent or needed to be encouraged. But that's kind of the mindset behind it, and it's tough out there. I mean, this is a long, lonely journey, and I think the more people you speak to, the more insights you gain and the more connections you make. And I mean, I'd imagine this podcast is exactly that for you. It's an opportunity to speak to some really cool, interesting people who are building cool products, and it just opens doors. And the introduction to Michael came from an introduction from our CFO's ex-colleagues, who was then part of this other network, who was just like, we're working with Michael, you need to speak to this guy. And I didn't know, from a bar of soap intro, literally, a couple of weeks later, how we are like planning to take over the world together, which is awesome. So there's just huge value in just chatting to people and networking.
But Ross, actually, I think probably one of the most important things, and this is so difficult for founders, right? So in South Africa, we often have small market segments, right? So, you want to build something for a market segment, but a standalone business is not, going to make it in that market. A market isn't big enough. And then what ends up happening is these founders start adding things. They go, cool, I'm not only going to do solar, but I'm also going to charge EVs, right? And then all of a sudden, everybody becomes a competitor. But I think what is so unique in what you've done, and I'll raise the point because I think founders need to learn from this. If you partner with someone else that focuses on something specifically, they can become a market leader in that space, allowing you to become a market leader in your space, and the success of both entities actually propels each other forward, which then could make the market big enough for you to be niche. So I think so many people in South Africa are scared to go niche because they think the market isn't big enough. Whereas I think what you guys are doing is saying, look, let me become a specialist in solar. Let me become a specialist in charging and EV fleets, And the combination of that could make both of your markets big enough that you can get traction faster than you would have if you actually try to be a specialist in both areas, which is really impossible to do in the early days.
I love that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, yeah, it for us, it really came from this kind of problem that was faced by our customers, which was, if you're going to EVs, like one of the logical questions is, yeah, can you do solar? Can you do battery backups? Can you do that for us? And you're absolutely right. And you're like, we had to decide like where we're going to build momentum, right? Where are we going to focus our time and our energy and our resources? Because again, as Ross said, it's tough starting a business in South Africa. There's a lot less funding available. The market size is a bit smaller, which actually I think creates really great entrepreneurs, to be honest with you. I think really tough, intelligent entrepreneurs that can solve these problems. But yeah, I think when we realized that, you know, even when we were talking about fleet, right, we were thinking about EVs, we're kind of thinking, okay, people assume that we also supply electric vehicles. We're like, no, we're not going to go into that space, because again, producing an electric vehicle is a whole different business. And then now again on the generation side, I think for the work and effort that Ross and his team has done so far, I mean, that's a wealth of experience that we can now tap into, and vice versa, right? And we can use that to tackle our markets together, which I think is such a better approach, especially in South Africa, where, you know, I ultimately think in this space there'll be about 4 or 5 players that really end up on top, and taking a collaborative approach will really help us go further, right? Yeah.
So what do you guys have in store? Sorry, Ross, you wanted to say something, but I'm curious to know, what do you guys have planned?
We've got a lot planned. I don't know how much we can and can't say, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I think again on the whole focus points, you know, how wide can you go? It's limitless until you kind of focus, and that's what I loved about Simi. They're very focused on the fleet management, smaller vehicle. It's what makes sense now, right? And once they figure that out, they can then, it's the beachhead. You know, they can get in and they can widen it. And the way I'm viewing it, I mean, we had a conversation with Michael the other day. We just kind of dipping our toes into the commercial market because we've been so focused on residential, and we feel that we've got that pretty down pat. Obviously, there's always room for improvement, but we're kind of ready now to go into commercial. And it's like, okay, where do you start? Whereas now Zimmy almost give us an opportunity to start with their customer base, because every person who owns a fleet also has a building where they operate from, and he's speaking to loads of potential customers that inherently we can just plug in next to, and it just makes the journey for each other so much simpler. He can offer something beyond what he offers, and we can, you know, do exactly the same for our customer base. So it just talks so nicely to one another, and just that partnership mentality. I think a lot of people think, you know, you need to have a piece of the pie on one side or the other. And there's a very cool book that I've read, and I encourage anyone to read it who's an entrepreneur. It's called, excuse the title, it's sort of cheesy, but How to Get Rich, by a guy called Felix Dennis. Great book. Anyway, he has a big chapter around, I think he calls it like big fish, who are your partners. So you get sharks who like try and take, you know, what's yours, and will you know, grab hold of your business and kind of hostile takeover. But then you've got what's called big fish. And this guy ran Maxim magazine, and he was a publisher, but his big fish was the printer. And both of them could thrive as businesses, and they didn't have to own a piece of each other. They just worked together, and one success is the other success. And it's like those kind of mutually beneficial relationships are hugely important, and I think need to be explored by all entrepreneurs. I think we stop ourselves through, how are we going to get a piece of that pie kind of mentality, where it's like, create your own pie in a sense. You know, it's big enough for everybody.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think, yeah, thinking about e-mobility is always thinking about the vehicles, the charging, and then the energy production or generation side. So in working with Versify, we're really starting to look at these product bundles for our customers, which is really exciting. So now it becomes a one-stop shop, right? Now it becomes, you know, almost seeing it as a single supplier that you're working with. And you're working with the experts in energy generation and solar. You're working with the experts in EV. So you don't have to go and find 10 other people to work with, which I think, again, will just drive down costs even more for our customers. And then I think what's also quite interesting is how we're thinking about the future with regards to, kind of alluded to some of the battery management, some of the vehicle to home systems, some of the ways in which we're looking at carbon and payments tracking, etc. So I think the conversations are just beginning right now. I think it's really exciting for both Ross and myself to go to our customer bases with our complementary offerings and seeing, what can we do for them to help them either make the shift and to drive down costs, which it's ultimately about.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a little curveball, Rene, bringing government, because in Cape Town, they said they were going to buy energy from people that were creating excess. Rene, what's your views on that? And then I want to hear from Ross if he's ever thought about partnering with them.
Well, buying excess can only happen if you buy a very expensive electricity meter that can count the kilowatt hours, and it's not economically viable. So no, I think until we solve that issue, apparently the older meters, actually, if you reverse current it just counts backwards, and I think that's actually a solution. They should just install old meters that just goes the other way.
Oh no.
So you buy sometimes and sometimes you supply, and then it just evens out.
Yeah, I don't think they want to give the 1-to-1 ratio back to the people, unfortunately. So no, but you've hit the nail on the head there. It sounds good. It's a nice romantic story, but the price of a three-phase bidirectional meter is like 14,000 rand, right? And when you're only getting, it's not even a rand a kilowatt hour, it's a lot less than that, but let's use that for round numbers. There's a lot of excess that you need to pump back just to pay off the meter, let alone get an ROI in your system, right? So what we're seeing in that regard is it's actually better to shift loads to optimize your actual system as opposed to pumping it back into the grid. And that's where like an EV comes into play so nicely. When your batteries are full and you got nowhere to put your excess power, put it into your car, or put it into your pool pump or into your geyser, these are the technologies that we're working on. But government does have a role to play because that's how the rest of the world works. And we have a supply issue, yet we have an abundance of people and private capital willing to like invest in this generation piece, but it needs to make sense for everybody. And I do think the city of Cape Town are the most progressive out of everybody, but it's like, yeah, it's not a home run yet. That's for sure.
Okay, cool. Guys, this has been a great conversation as always, but we have to finish with what we like to call our quick fire lightning round, right? So Michael, I'm not sure, did we do it with you last time?
I don't recall. Maybe we ran out of time.
Okay, so I'm going to drag you in again. So whether you did or not, you're getting dragged in. So obviously the premises, you got to think of the first answer that comes to your mind. I'll rotate the questions, and just think your first answer and shoot it out, and let's see what we get. All right, are you ready? So
let's do it.
Ross, you kind of messed it up already, so I'm going to have to go to Michael on this one. So, Michael, if you could recommend any book to a founder, something that you've read, what book would you advise? And you can't use Ross as an example from earlier.
The $100 Startup by Chris Gilgebau. Can't pronounce his name.
Oh, that guy. Can you tell us why quickly?
It's a book about how to start a business with less than $100, and he goes through a number of examples of how that can be done. And it's just such a great way of thinking about guerrilla marketing and MVP development, and just all things frugal.
Oh, nice, I like it. All right, Ross, over to you. What is the best career advice that you've ever received that you have to part to the next founder that you meet?
I think in the theme of fundraising, revenue is your best generation. Customers are your best generation of fundraising. I think people jump too quickly to relying on raising funds from VCs and external investors, whereas, just raising revenue is the best market indicator, the best ways to raise money. And ironically, get that right and the funds flow from every VC around the world, basically. So I think look at your revenue as soon as possible, turn that on as soon as possible.
You're making Rene's heart very happy with that answer, I must say. And on that, I'm going to actually throw Rene a quick fire question because I don't think he's ever gotten one. Rene, do you think there will be a company that will ever dethrone Tesla? And if so, who is it going to be?
Oh, no, definitely. It's already happening, Bobby, over in China.
Okay.
So they're making some beautiful, it's a Michael will know that, it's BYD, isn't it?
BYD,
Yep.
Okay.
And I mean, they're pushing out EVs at a rate which Elon Musk can only do once he has his robotic workforce in place. But also great cars at really good price points. And we'd probably see some of those vehicles in South Africa before we see Teslas.
Wow.
Okay, great. So there you go. I mean, they're probably going to be rolling out more models when government gets the regulations sorted. Yeah, I think we'll see more of that.
So Michael, that's very good news for you, eh? Wow.
I thought his answer was going to be Zumi and Versify. I thought you were going to say we're going to top the Tesla.
Luckily, Michael's going to hook us up with some chargers for free and to power our EVs.
And Ross with some free solar, eh?
Here we go.
Listen, I've been struggling to get that T-shirt from you, so I don't know how we're going to do a free charger.
Keep shooting, Renee. You're going to get it. Ross, to
We'll try our
finish,
best.
Ross, to the last one. If you had a billboard, your own billboard on the side of the road, what would you put on it? What slogan would you have it say?
Embrace the less. I think, yeah, get the grind going. Life is always harder than you think it is, but it also doesn't need to be. I think, enjoy the battle. That's the journey that you're on. And the grind is generally worth it in the long run, I think.
Nice. The juice is worth the squeeze. I think that'll be mine. I just realized what mine will be. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining today. This was a great conversation. Ross, it was great to meet you and have you on the show. And all the best, Michael and Ross, on your ventures together and your partnerships. And yeah, we look forward to watching what happens. And yeah, Renier, I'll see you next week.